citizens of European, German, Spanish, Italian origin are continuing to suffer at the hands of a cruel dictatorship. I would insist that the European Commission follow the example of the European Parliament, and that we continue to move forward in this direction.
For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Geer.
Frau Präsidentin. Sehr geehrte
Thank you very much, Madam President. Mrs. von der Leyen, I haven't come here to acknowledge the fact that you took on board many of our demands in your letter, many points that formed part of our electoral campaign as Social Democrats, which you've taken on board too. For instance, looking at unemployment security, unemployment insurance, making sure that we fight that particular issue. I welcome that. Of course, when it comes to the Member States, I would like to see what happens next. What will Member States do with your commitment, with what you've said? What will happen in terms of how they handle this particular issue? So you've made an announcement, but I must admit I'm a little bit sceptical. I mean, it's fine to show confidence, show trust in advance, but there are institutional arguments that would militate against that. In terms of the electoral campaign, I, of course, fought for Franz Timmermans, who was our Spitzenkandidat for our political family, and therefore I thought it was important to recognise that rather than nationality. And I spoke to all our voters, and I'm sure all of our S&D and SPD members did the same. We said that we would only be electing a Spitzenkandidat, and I intend to do that, and the 16 of us intend to do that. So this Spitzenkandidat process, we thought it was a great victory for European democracy. We praised it. I unfortunately take note of the fact that today we have gone against that. So my question to you, Madam, how are you going to make sure that we get guarantees from the European Council to make sure that that kind of thing does not happen?
For 1 minute, Madam Chair.
Thank you. It is a great honour and a great responsibility for me to stand here in the heart of European democracy and deliver not only my first comments, but the first comments made by my party in any parliament. I'm a new MEP from Hungary, a wonderful country many of you only hear about when there is a new attack on the rule of law or on civil society. And I know that many of you are fed up with it. As a Hungarian, I'm also fed up. Because until now, the European elite has turned a blind eye and appeased populists like Viktor Orban. And this has to change now. We must fight back against those who seek to destroy our union and ensure it remains a community of values. We must keep Europe united, prosperous and secure. And for that, we need leadership that is not afraid to defend European democracy. And we expect actions, not words. The next Commission must provide specific safeguards for protecting the rule of law and leaders with the political will and ability to implement them. Because today, standing for Europe is often seen as standing for the status quo, but the status quo is not good enough. We need real change.
Madam Vanna, for 1 minute.
Frau Ministerin. Minister van der Leyen, you talked much about peace in Europe today. I come from a neutral country, from Austria, and as a Green and as someone fighting for a union of peace, then I when it comes to the defence and European army and European defence union and the way you call it, I'm very critical of all of that. A majority of EU citizens does not see defence as a priority. They see health, environmental issues, education and so on as the priorities, and that's what this majority of citizens want. And they focus more on diplomacy and humanitarian ways of looking at peace in the world as opposed to military ways. We think that it would be the wrong way to look at defence spending in the EU and to increase that. This money could be used for social and environmental issues because the money is missing for that. We don't need a defence minister in Europe. We need someone who addresses the other issues. And we're just wondering if you, as EU Commission, could be credible when it comes to looking at using less weapons, and you could stand up for environmental and social issues and to control the weapons industry.
Mr. Fest, 1 minute.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, and thank you also for your address to the House. I think the previous speaker just now will have pointed out to us that you are the wrong person for this position. And what we've heard so far is a document which is opportunism, laughably so. It's quite obviously, I mean, everything was in there. Minimum wage, gender equality, sustainable Europe, the empowerment of children, Me Too, SMEs, fair taxes, all of that was in there. And I don't know, your political approach seems to be to really look at trivial matters on the left and on the green side. What about yourself? What about your position, your functions? In your statement, you know, in content terms, there was nothing, I believe, that actually something that we could hang on to. I think that as far as you're concerned, all you're really concerned about is getting this new post, this new job, a trophy, if you like, a political trophy, and to be entitled to a new official vehicle. So my question to you is, what do you actually want to achieve here? I'm afraid your statement leads me to the conclusion that this woman should not be the future President of the Commission. Thank you.
Mr. Church, 1 minute.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Ms von der Leyen, we're very concerned to note that there's virtually no difference between Timmermans and yourself. You're trying to keep the left happy, to keep the Liberals happy, to keep the Socialists happy. You wrote to them to explain what your project was, but you didn't turn to the other side. And this is where we're seeing very serious events right now. What you have done is put a wedge between yourself and many European citizens. Some don't like some of the election results across Europe, and then they turn their back on those people. That is very serious. There are people who have different economic policies, different opinions, and that may not be in line with the majority consensus here that Timmermans and yourself are virtually identical mouthpieces for. You have said that you will always stand against those who are against unity. But I do not think there is anything worse for unity in the European Union and unity in the European Parliament than for people to drive a wedge between themselves and groups, which flies in the face of a rules-based system or establishing a common project.
Mr. Kirian-Joshi, for 1 minute.
Chair, many of us thought that Brexit is a lesson and an opportunity for European political elite, a signal that a change of course is necessary. EU citizens are rightly discontent with the undemocratic and intransparent decision-making in this House and in other EU institutions. Madam von der Leyen, your reference to strengthening of the Spitzenkandidat system was somewhat ironic, if not cynical. This is the system that was ditched in order to nominate you here. Spitzenkandidat system is far from being perfect, but it was a step in the right direction to select a nominee to head the European Commission. Your nomination just shows that the leaders of the EU ignore the voice of the European electorate and don't learn from their earlier mistakes. Such decisions and ignorance fuel Euroscepticism and criticism, so beware and don't be surprised. This is a disappointment for those who wish to see a stronger, a more credible, a more democratic and a more transparent EU. Ms von der Leyen, it is not your fault, but you have greatly contributed to this disappointment, and this is why many people in this chamber find your nomination unacceptable. Thank you.
Mr. Rangel, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to start by congratulating Ms von der Leyen for her inspiring and inspired speech, full of conviction and full of ambition for Europe. You can certainly count on our support. I wanted to make two further points. I think it's rather a shame that since you're a physician yourself and you have a concern about health, the EPP master plan to combat cancer is not something which you have stressed. It was a long battle within our group, and we very much hope that the European Commission will take that initiative forward. My other point is a question, a vital question that no one else has raised. There's just one sentence in your speech about the multi-annual financial framework for the 2021-2027 period. There's a passing reference to it. But when we look at cohesion policy, the proposal made by the Commission is unfair. If you look at Italy, in the middle of Europe, 6% of cohesion. Croatia, 16%. Finland, way above the EU average, 5%. Lithuania, 23%. We're comparing neighbouring countries. The cohesion strategy in the Commission proposal is unfair, and the reason for that was that 5% was taken out of the cohesion policy budget for no reason. The ERDF, Social Fund, Cohesion Fund, causing the poorest countries to suffer. There are many priorities for the EU, I agree, but Ms von der Leyen, convergence and cohesion is absolutely vital to achieving unity. So if there is not a revision of the MFF along the lines of what the European Parliament approved, there will be problems of cohesion, there will be problems of unity, there will be differences between member states.
Madame Guillaume, 1 minute.
Madame von der Leyen, vous avez
Mrs von der Leyen, you have not performed well. You ticked lots of boxes, but you didn't tick all of them. And we are not clear on many points. What about agriculture? You avoided using any figures. And you're here today because you've gone through a specific process, and it was one very disputed, and it was an agreement between the member states, and actually there's not many of them here today to really support you. The Council did not bear in mind the message from the citizens and the Spitzenkandidat process and the political will there, and I would like to say that the Council was marginalising the role of the European Parliament and turning it into a junior partner. This is one example I can give you here of this. When it comes to migration and asylum, it's not enough just to hear you say that you want to have a reform for the X number of time, because these things are just going to be reformed and reformed until they are in a deadlock. We are talking about major operations in the Mediterranean Sea, and we need to protect the dignity of the European Union. This is the point of it here. You were talking about changing the direction of Europe. That is the point here.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Federley, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam von der Leyen, I must say a few sincere words. I was rather critical to your nomination. I was rather critical to your to you becoming the head of the Commission. Then again, the process we had actually made me feel respected as a member of the European Parliament, as representative of my Swedish voters. For that, I condole you. But also the respect that you showed our group, the Renew Group, the group that grew most in the European Parliament and that defeated populists all through Europe. Thank you for that respect. And that is also why you will have my vote today, because you showed a sincere interest in what the Parliament do think. And remembering what was the procedure 5 years ago, I don't think many colleagues in here felt that you had a proper intervention with Commissioner President Juncker. We had proper interventions with you, and you did listen to that. For that, I respect you. But we will also hold you responsible on your mechanism on an initiative. For example, animal welfare frame law has been asked for by this Parliament by a majority of about 80% of the members for 5 years. Nothing has happened so far. We will come back as soon as you have your college in place, and we'll recall that request, and we will hold you accountable to it. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Ms Scott Cato, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Those wanting to stop the UK's disastrous crash out of the EU should feel greatly encouraged by Dr von Leyen's comments about Brexit. I was delighted to hear you call yourself a Remainer to our group and to say that you would be willing to give us the extra time we may need to resolve this deeply damaging episode in our country's history. But on a range of issues, from tax and trade to climate and protecting life in our countryside, there is a gulf between your views and the Green Agenda for Change. Most importantly, I cannot vote for you because the appointments process that led us here is a step away from closer engagement with citizens and from democracy. The backroom deal done in the Council explicitly reassured the far right in the countries of Central Europe, where the rule of law is under threat and democratic standards are at risk. It's so disappointing that the election of the Commission President will depend on the votes of the far right, rather than those of a strong, pro-European majority that could have been achieved by offering the radical change that Green voters demand.
Anderson, un minuto.
Ms Anderson, 1 minute.
Onorevole Anderson?
Ms Anderson?
Non c'è.
Not present.
Good morning. Frau Bundesministerin.
Madam Federal Minister, I shall be brief. You are the wrong person for the job, regardless of what job you're applying for. You have taken initiatives as a minister that were completely inappropriate. For instance, the advertising agency and the money spent on that. And that was with a view to persuading the German public. As a defence minister, you're also leaving behind demoralised soldiers. Also, our capacity for defence is very much damaged. Instead of that, you have, of course, provided creche opportunities for staff, but that has actually been a joke. You have turned our army into a kind of creche itself. Now, obviously, formally, I should wish you the best of luck in your election. I perhaps could do so with a hope that you will use your position in order to destroy all of this. I understand from your statement that you want to, of course, be held in high regard. Now, I, myself, for many, many years, have been a voter previously of the CDU, and I'd really rather do anything than actually elect you for this party. Thank you.
Onorevole Van Orden.
Mr Van Orden, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr President. Dr von der Leyen, I'm greatly disturbed by your attachment to the political project of a European army and European strategic autonomy. This will inevitably lead to a transatlantic divide and undermine NATO. It can only encourage our enemies. But let me focus on our most critical issue as far as the UK is concerned. We welcome your statement of respect for the decision of the British people to leave the European Union and of the need to work closely with Britain in the future. Goodwill on the part of Brussels has so far been rather missing. But we're disappointed that all you seem to offer is extension of our withdrawal date. This is hardly ambitious. Instead, may we suggest you use your influence before you take office to urge amendment or reinterpretation of those aspects of the withdrawal agreement that are clearly unacceptable to the UK. This wouldn't take a lot. Solutions are there. In Europe, as they say, nothing is possible and everything is possible. Britain will leave the European Union on the 31st of October. Let's ensure this is on good terms, without acrimony, to provide the basis for a strong positive relationship in the future, fully respectful of the expressed desire of the British people for control of their own borders and their own laws. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Mr Kolokusic, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. The basis for development and advancement, as well as the future of the EU, is equality and the rule of law. Equality and the rule of law primarily present themselves in the way the democratic representatives are elected. Out of 130 representatives in the European Parliament, 20 presidential and vice presidential posts went to Germany and 0 to Croatia and Slovenia. That is 0%. Furthermore, the rules of procedure of the Parliament require that these posts be distributed based on a geographic criterion. So therefore, not only the rule of law has been violated, and this is inadmissible. So we have Germany, which has 20 representatives, which is contrary to equality and is actually supremacy in action. So in addition to this, we should elect the President of the Commission who comes from Germany. This is absolutely unacceptable, because this is not Europe of equality, and this is a Europe which will bring the European project into question.
2 minuti, prego.
Mr. Lange, 2 minutes.
Ja, dank u wel, meneer de voorzitter.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, the elections in the Netherlands showed very quickly that you're going to have to be constructive if you want to keep Europe working, because, Madam Candidate, you've already heard, some people say your plans are too much, others say they're not enough. And so maybe that is a sign here that you're finding a good balance. We've talked a lot about your presentations and how you were proposed, but colleagues, this Parliament must look at itself very critically. The candidate talked about the importance of unity, and it's that unity which is what we did not see in the Parliament. Do you think that the candidates, that the Spitzenkandidat from the biggest political party, can be pushed through, and then you would hope then that the second Spitzenkandidat would get through? Well, that's very, very naive if you believe that, because those people really, well, there was nothing to do with transparency here, or a strong Europe, or a strong Parliament. They were just jumping on the horse and running away with it. Macron and Orban, well, that's a strange combination, and they were in the lead. So I'm pleased with what we're hearing from the candidate. She wants to try to look at the damage caused by the Council and trying to limit that in 2024.
Started her speech by mentioning Simone Weil, who wasn't only president of this House, but who was also one of the first female members, or the few, unfortunately, female members of the Académie Française. And when she became member of the Académie Française, she received a sword. And in this sword, she made sure there were 3 engravings: 7, 8, 5, 6, 1. Her number in Auschwitz, remembering us every day why we have this Europe and why we should fight for it every day. The motto of the French Republic and the motto of Europe: unity in diversity. And the choice we have ahead of us tonight, dear colleagues, those who are responsible, those who are constructive, is: are we going to be guided in our vote by frustration and anger about a Council backroom deal, or in the spirit of Simone Weil, will we build together with this candidate the Europe that our citizens need? Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Ms. Bonafé, 1 minute. Thank you, President. I'd like to take us back for a moment to the European elections of May last. Nationalists were saying that Europe was failing and they would help bring it down. They haven't yet succeeded. The citizens of Europe still want to believe in Europe. And for that reason, Ms von der Leyen, we call on you to live up to their expectations, breathe new life into Europe, bring innovation. You'll be the first woman at the head of such a prestigious organisation, and we want a solid Europe of solidarity. We can't look back. We need to take courage in our hands and use the flexibility of the Stability Pact for growth and jobs, so that finally we can move towards a new model for development that will unambiguously put the environment on the table, not as a limitation, which unfortunately we've seen too often here, but as an opportunity. It won't be holding us back. It will be breathing new life into growth, because we'll have sustainable growth, and in that way you could live up to the words that you have shared with us this morning. We don't want to turn a blind eye to the excesses of nationalism. We don't want walls, we want responsibility sharing. you talk about economic governance and migration. We've done that when we changed the Dublin system here. It's only with such a vision and such action from the future Commission that will be acceptable to us. Thank you very much. Ms. Karan-Sova, 1 minute.
Madam President-designate, 15 years ago, Central Europeans gave trust to the European project, and now that trust is eroding. Many proposals in the past created an East-West divide on many issues: single market issues, dual quality of products, posting of workers, to the issues of how to make Europe more secure. It is extremely important that the new Commission adopt a different, new approach. The EU must work to rebuild the trust the people has lost, to ensure that we listen to each other before any proposal is made, to continue to abolish the existing barriers in the internal market and not to create new ones, to treat all EU citizens equally, with equal access to work and study anywhere in Europe. So, Madam President-designate, I hope you can pledge today to be the voice of all EU citizens. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Urtasun, 1 minute.
Madam Minister, good morning. Your candidacy is basically a renouncement. We are giving up on the parliamentarisation of our common life here. We're also giving up on a strong defence of the rule of law. We mustn't forget that you're here because Mr. Timmermans was actually vetoed by a number of countries because he was brave on these issues. It's also giving up on our, climate policies. You know that there are changes and that there are many limitations to that. And your Commission will start, unfortunately, with an original sin which I think has been with us all along. Particularly, of course, we've got the question of the votes of the extreme right. We shall see what happens with those votes. But what about the cordon sanitaire that we're trying to establish here in this House? For all these reasons, I'm afraid, Madam Minister, I will not be able to support your nomination. I think Parliament should reject it. And I would also like to say to those who are saying that for the sake of Europe and Europeanism, we should actually defend your candidacy. Well, I think it's important to make sure that the European Parliament does not just yield to the poor decisions and poor decision-making of Council. So therefore, for democratic reasons, for institutional reasons and for European reasons, I think we should dismiss your candidacy. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Krah, 1 minute.
Designate President, ladies and gentlemen, what we're seeing here is a lesson on how not to do things. We've had to listen to a lot because of our scepticism when it comes to promises for democracy and promises for Spitzenkandidates here and in Brussels. But if you choose her, you'll go much further beyond that scepticism. Mr. Weber, you ran as the Spitzenkandidat, and you were congratulating her and calling for us to support her. And I'm just wondering about how you feel yourself. Anyone who has worked with her or known about her knows that she has failed as defense minister in Germany. She has turned the German army into one where the planes can't fly and the tanks can't drive and the guns don't shoot. And so that is her responsibility. And so if you're going to be voting for her, well, I would be saying that you would be bringing so much explosive into the Commission, and she has failed so badly in Germany.
Thank you. Ms. Tomasic, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mrs. von der Leyen, we have heard a very ambitious plan on your part, but we haven't heard much about implementation. For a moment there, I thought I was back in my childhood. I grew up in social Yugoslavia, and I had a lot of opportunity to hear grand ideas that were quite similar to yours. Fraternity and equality, political integration, common army, greater workers and women's rights. We know how that story ended. Your vision will meet the same end because that the citizens do not want that. If they wanted it, you wouldn't have to fret today if you are going to get a majority in this House. You speak of equality and common efforts in Europe, but you keep forgetting that all leading EU posts went to all the member states. And on top of everything, you are suggesting the system of outvoting when it comes to common foreign and security policy. So much about equality. In your speech, you spoke about the foundations of Europe in Greek philosophy and the Roman law. But as a Christian Democrat, you didn't speak about Christianity. Your Europe is fleeing its roots, and this is why it is now so divided.
Prego, un minuto.
Mr. Giarrusso, 1 minute. Ms. von der Leyen, we can't put blind faith in someone. We have concerns about your political action. You've been talking about fairness, environment, women, workers. We've heard about a minimum wage, saving human lives. Yes, the EU has responsibilities in these areas and others, and it can't put all the burden of immigration on one member state. The EU needs to go back to what it was at the time of the founders. Growth for the whole of Europe. That's not what's happening. Youth unemployment is very high in Italy now. It's very hard for young people to settle down and have families. So, Ms. von der Leyen, we would like to see a safe EU for all, for farmers, fishermen, entrepreneurs, young people. We want the same opportunities for development for all. So we call on you to enter into a serious commitment to do away with the scandal of tax havens, to harmonise tax legislation applying to businesses, and have a very severe anti-mafia policy. If you can turn words into deeds, you can count on loyal support from us. But if it remains words, then Europe will still be putting the main burden on places like the south of Italy, and we will then be coming down on you like a ton of bricks.
Prego, 2 minuti.
Thank you, Mr. Toubé. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, President. Mrs. von der Leyen. I very much hope that everyone today who believes in European cooperation, I hope that everyone will actually give you their support today. The extreme left and the extreme right would appear to be voting against you today, but I think that actually you should see that as a sort of sign of honour for you. It's a tribute to you in a way. In addition to that, it would appear that the Greens are siding with those ranks. I must say I'm surprised by that, and I also must say that I think we're a little bit ashamed the fact that you'll be voting against the very first woman who might become president of the European Commission, and in addition to that, someone who can actually garner a majority in favour of a progressive climate policy for Europe. I mean, there's a lot of cooperation that we need to get on with in Europe for the climate, of course, but also we need to fight cross-border crime. We also need to look at freedom of movement in Europe. That is something that goes without saying for us, but that kind of freedom of movement should not apply to terrorists or to criminals. And from that point of view, we need to shore up our police cooperation, I would argue. There's also the immigration policy. We need to look at that as a central key issue. We need to have the right majorities in order to make sure that we have greater legal certainty and alongside that a better control for our immigration policy. I'm convinced that this European Parliament will be able to get this majority in order to support an immigration policy that is led both by the heart and by the head. And finally, if I may, Europe for me is all about freedom, it's all about entrepreneurship, it's all about making sure that we increase security and safety for all of our residents. You will have our support today, madam, and we also have great expectations. I must point that out to you. The European Parliament will be ready to cooperate with you in order to tackle the key problems that Europe faces. We need to do that today. Thank you.
Ms. Kaljurand, 1 minute.
Madam von der Leyen, first of all, I would like to thank you for today's remarks and for the letter you addressed to the S&D Group. It was well received and it added a lot to the discussion we had last week in Brussels. I would also like to recognise your commitment to democracy, rule of law, human rights, fair and equal Europe, Europe without dividing lines. Now I'm looking forward to concrete actions and to concrete answers to the questions that were raised by my colleagues. Also, I would like to draw your attention to another dividing line that you did not address today. See on lõhe ida ja lääne vahel.
It's a division between East and West, exemplified by the latest decision from the European Council, in which all of the important positions were given to Western European countries. I do not want to have a Europe that falls into an East and a West, new and old member states, states with more votes and states with fewer votes. We cannot build Europe in this way. That's why I ask you, how do you assess this decision and what are you going to do in order to not have this division become even deeper?
Mr. Guinea, 1 minute.
Domnule președinte, doamnă von der Leyen.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. von der Leyen.
It's okay now? Vreau să insist pe două lucruri importante pentru.
So I wanted to stress one point that's very important for the Romanian delegation. This is economic integration and fiscal integration. And this covers Eurozone members and all countries that want to join the Eurozone, like Romania. We need support so that the support mechanism, the technical support mechanism for joining the euro works. And Mr. Juncker mentioned this several times. And I welcome the attention that you gave to launching a pan-European mechanism for the rule of law. That was something that was very important for the Renew group. And I would say again that the European Parliament adopted this principle for this mechanism 2 years ago, and we would like to see the necessary legislation launched so that it can be used in the European Parliament.
Mr. Smith, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Good morning, colleagues. We've reached the point in the debate where everything has been said, but it has not yet been said by everybody. But Mrs von der Leyen, I would like to congratulate you on what I thought was an impressive speech this morning. You've come a long way in your presentation with the House and your interaction with the groups here. I was particularly struck by your commitment to a gender-balanced College of Commissioners. That will shake things up in itself. The Scottish Government has been gender-balanced for 5 years now. I commend our experience to you. Congratulations. And on Brexit, you're aware Scotland has a particular perspective on this matter, but you should also be aware that there's colleagues from across the House, in England, in Wales, in Northern Ireland and elsewhere, working hard to bring some sense to Brexit. We are united in the fact that the best Brexit is no Brexit. There are members of this House who will make noise. Some of us are here to find solutions, and I'm very glad that you will be an ally in keeping the door open for us. You're also very welcome to this House, but to add another thing to your in tray, this House is not complete. We are missing 3 members from Catalonia, not least our group colleague Oriol Junqueras. The only solution to this intractable problem will be dialogue, and you, personally, are in a position to be an honest broker in that discussion. I hope you will play that role. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Koos, 1 minute.
Okay. Onorevole Koos.
Mr. Koos.
Thank you very much, President. Madam Minister, 14 years ago, you were appointed Minister for Family Affairs, and at the time, my wife and I were delighted, because we knew that you have 7 children yourself, you come from a big family yourself, and we were expecting our 10th child at that moment in time, and we expected you to conduct good policy in favour of the family, to support families, but we were very disappointed in the event. I look at your address to the House today. I understand you want to build a form of Europe that is premised upon Greek philosophy and Roman law, and there's something missing there, it seems to me. What I'm missing is the Christian premise for all this, the Christian roots of Europe, because without that, it simply cannot work. It will collapse. And therefore, what you're trying to build here is another Babel's Tower, I'm afraid. That's what I fear. Or alternatively, this will be a sort of house that will collapse because it is on such rocky foundations. I wish you could avoid that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Yaki, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Madam Minister, European Union has launched
the humiliating procedure under Article 7 towards Poland. Someone has decided that it is lawful when, for instance, judges accept the robbery of properties for 115-year-old people. And the other side, it is unlawful when we restore people's influence on the justice system. For example, we are implementing random assignment of matters in court. Every time when I'm being asking, show me at least one example, one, no 8, no 10, one example of the solution that we implement in Poland and which is not exist in another EU country, there is always the same answer: silence. Silence. Madam Minister, that's why I'm asking. Are you going to end this ridiculous political action with Article 7? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sweetson.
Thank you. Mrs. von der Leyen, I would like to thank you for your introductory remarks. I would like to remind everybody once again that we had the Spitzenkandidaten process, that we had our Spitzenkandidat, Mr. Weber. Unfortunately, to some who wanted to show that they are great Democrats, this process failed, and here you are as a candidate for the post of the President of the European Commission. I have to say that I am glad that although the process of Spitzenkandidaten was not successful, that we do have a candidate from the EPP family who was relative winner of the European elections. The second reason why I'm happy that you're here today is the fact that you're a woman, and I'm very happy to hear what your approach to gender equality is. I was happy to hear how you are going to treat the half of the European and the world population, and I really like your approach. What I didn't really hear in your speech, and I would like to hear your opinion on that, is the following. I know that you have very good relations with our Minister of Defense. I actually come from a rather new EU member states, and I didn't really hear much about the differences that currently exist between all the new member states, Schengen countries and non-Schengen countries. I think it is important that the Schengen zone be extended. Croatia is one of the candidates, and I hope you will be working on that. Also, I would like to hear more about your approach and your opinion on the enlargement of the European Union by including the Western Balkan countries. I am very happy to hear your opinion about the economy. The people are not here to serve the economy, but it's the other way around. We cannot actually spend more than we earn. First we have to earn, and then we have to allocate it in a fair manner, and I'm happy to hear that. Your Green Deal is to be welcomed. Regardless of whether or not the Green will vote for you, your Green Deal is extremely important because of sustainability and the future of our children, and I'm glad that this is a part of your portfolio. When it comes to the migrations, I hope you will continue working on the implementation of the plan for Africa. Mr. Weber, if I'm not mistaken, had a commissioner for Africa in his election program. I believe that we have to continue working on the cooperation with Africa, but protecting Europe at the same time. So in this sense, I would like to give you my support once again, and I would like to ask my colleagues in this House to remember why we are all here united, and this is peace, prosperity and integration. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Ms. von der Leyen, welcome to the House of the Citizens of Europe. You were not Spitzenkandidat, and you're not a socialist yet. We'll see by the end of your term of office. You know that you needed or need socialists to become president. It looks as though you're willing to enter into certain commitments. You sent them to our group yesterday, and you've reiterated them this morning here in the plenary. So there will be a socialist stamp on your presidency. There'll be greater social justice, a European minimum wage, European unemployment insurance, a child and youth guarantee EU-wide. We also appreciate your gender equality strategy. If the gender pay gap can be eliminated and women can be protected against gender-based violence, then it may be possible to achieve true equality in the future, which you've committed to in your College of Commissioners. Ms von der Leyen, if you are appointed, we will work together to ensure that you meet those commitments with directives, regulations, instruments and financial resources which will allow those aims to be achieved. We'll be delighted to work with the first female president of the European Commission if you are elected. Good luck.
Thank you. Ms. Katainen, please stick to time. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Madam von der Leyen, in your program you have prioritized climate matters, and in this discussion as well you have been or people have been demanding for concrete measures and actions and solutions, and that is why I would also like to focus on climate and forest issues in particular, because they are closely interlinked. It is very important that you strive towards carbon-free Europe and intend to achieve the goals of the energy and climate strategy. In the Commission's 2050 vision, bioeconomy and wood-based products play a huge role in giving up the fossil economy. It is crucial that the ability of forests to sequester carbon is looked after, and that is implemented through active and sustainable forest management and forestry industry, and not by limiting the use of wood. So I would like to hear how you will make sure that in a Europe of growing forest resources, the use of wood is seen as a solution and not as a problem in combating climate change. What are your views on this very concrete matter?
Grazie, onorevole Colà.
Thank you, Member Colaya. 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Madam von der Leyen, at the last public consultation, the majority of stakeholders and citizens rejected the reopening of the liability regime of the directive on electronic commerce. As you are well aware, imposing liability on online content service providers and mandatory filtering of content was part of the controversial issues during the last copyright reform. Over 250,000 people in Germany only protested against the devastating Article 13, now numbered 17, of the copyright directive and against the introduction of upload filters. More than 5 million signed a petition, the biggest in the European history. In contrast with all that, in your agenda for Europe, you seem to support the reopening of the e-commerce directive and, quote unquote, upgrading the liability and safety rules. Dear Madam von der Leyen, could you please elaborate on what that upgrade means and confirm that the principle of safe harbour for hosting service providers stays intact, as well as that no mandatory filters will be proposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. 1 minute. Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Minister, the Eurozone with Japan has the lowest growth rates and the highest taxes in the developed world. An EU CO2 tax requires unanimity. Madam Minister, you are therefore raising the point about unanimity at EU level when it comes to taxes and calling it into question. Your ministry has spent billions on external consultancy, and primarily it went to McKinsey. Around a third of the military resources are ready for use. A journalist wrote saying McKinsey is using the defense ministry like a cash machine, and it says that the army is not working well, the consultancy gets paid and the taxpayer pays. Colleagues, do we really want to have an EU consultancy tax in the future? And this is something that we would be looking at implementing when it comes to across the EU for the EU policies for the environment. And that is not what we want. Thank you, Mr. Vondra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Secretary. Just listening to you last week in our group, there was a sign of promise and hope for me. But reading your letters yesterday and your speech today, I have to admit that I'm more and more disappointed. You gave up totally to the progressive and the green agenda, and it's particularly clear in the climate change policy when you gave up to 95% of the Green Party demands and they want the remaining 5%, and maybe you will even incline to do it. I guess that instead of adapting ourselves to the climate change, you agreed with these unrealistic goals in 2030, and the vision of non-carbon society, for me coming from Czechoslovakia, reminds me of a promise of non-class society, that's against the nature. And 30 years ago, I remember in China, everybody was driving a bicycle, where every family in Europe has a car. Do you believe that in 2030, the vision of Europe is that a couple of billionaires would be driving a battery-charged Maybachs and the rest, she or her, will drive their bicycles, and the Chinese, everybody would have a car? This is your vision of Europe being competitive with China in the future?
Grazie. Onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Sean Kelly, 2 minutes.
Ursula Ardous.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to welcome Ms von der Leyen, and I hope she does well.
A little over 2 weeks ago, your performance since, and especially here today, has been truly remarkable. You've shown that you're a woman of great talent, confidence, perspective, calmness, and well equipped to do the job of Commission President, which I hope you will get this evening by at least 400+ votes. You mentioned many areas of great importance. The one that mattered most in the European elections was climate change, and I welcome your practical approach to that. And one thing I would ask you is to ensure that as we move to a low carbon economy, that nobody is left behind. We have to have a just transition for all. The tough cutter from Ireland, the steel worker from Germany, the dairy farmer from Italy, the coal miner from Poland. Also, Switzerland candidate has been mentioned. You're in some respects the victim or the beneficiary of it, the way you look at it. Would you agree with me that you might set up a working group of nominees from the Council, nominees from the Parliament and the Commission to come forward with proposals how this can work in the future, and in that way you could rescue the process? I was also very pleased with what you said about Brexit and your consistency in the answers you gave to me at the EPP Group, reiterated here today in relation to the backstop, the withdrawal agreement and flexibility in regard to an extension if necessary. I would ask you to further underline your support for Ireland in the future, as we had unwavering support from Jean-Claude Juncker, Michel Barnier, etc. Finally, I just want to say to you that your gender equality is something that you're in the ideal position to lead, and we look forward to that.
Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Liberatsky, please. Boguslav, 1 minute.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you very much. Mrs. von der Leyen, on behalf of the Polish Socialists and Democrats, I would like to take this opportunity that you've come across really well in all of our talks, in all of our meetings. You've said a number of interesting things. I am particularly pleased to hear what you have to say about the rule of law and your commitment to that issue. No compromises. The environment, safe food, healthy food and unpolluted air. Now, of course, we need to have fair distribution of the burden in all these regards. A fair share. You've spoken about cohesion policy. You've indicated that you wish to strengthen our cohesion policy. You've also talked about the minimum wage. I was really happy to hear about that, and I very much hope that that will be appropriate for member states. This is what we're here for. In terms of our foreign policy and defence policy, you've been perhaps missing an angle towards the east. Russia, Ukraine, there's a bit of a deficit there. And then finally, geographical distribution when it comes to posts held within the European Union. On that point, we've got Germany, France, Italy. They seem to be at the upper ends of the scale. And then Central Europe, Eastern Europe have got nothing. I hope that that will change in the future.
Thank you,
Mr. Kuchuk. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Ms von der Leyen, the EU needs change. That's the message that citizens sent us. It's very clear that the people of Europe like the EU, but they want to see it change. They want to see effective reforms to bring it closer to them. They want to see more integration. That is vital. But this cannot come at the expense of enlargement. Integrating the region of the Western Balkans is vital. They're not in the EU yet, but they're vital to our security. If we don't have a commissioner for enlargement, we won't have the enlargement. Right now, we don't only have a two-speed Europe, we also have double standards in the sense that food, transport and other standards are different. There's the Schengen area and other controls. What will you do about that? The outgoing Commission entered into lots of commitments but didn't do anything. It's also very important for negotiations to be concluded on the MFF so that we can ensure that it kicks in from the beginning of 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Kubilius. 2 minutes.
Madam von der Leyen, coming from small Lithuania, I'm very happy to support your candidacy. First of all, because thanks personally to you and to the decisions of the German government and NATO, we have Bundeswehr troops stationed in Lithuania as part of NATO forces. Because of that, we are feeling ourselves much more secure. Madam, I am absolutely sure that you will be a highly prudent and very effective Commission President. The EU needs a real leadership. For us, the EU is not only the common market, not only a source of our economic growth and our social welfare, not only our common united instrument to fight climate change. Those benefits which the EU is bringing to all of us are becoming even more important when on a national level we are starting to face a stronger challenge of middle income trap and long-term economic stagnation. But besides those benefits, the EU for us is also a basis for our geopolitical security and stability. The EU has a very powerful and unique instrument how to expand the area of security, stability, rule of law and economic growth on the European continent. And this instrument is a EU enlargement policy. We in Lithuania, with the success of our achievements, are the best example of how powerful is this instrument. We are grateful to European solidarity, which we faced back from the beginning of the 1990s. I would like to use this opportunity to urge you, as the new President of the Commission, to lead ambitious policy of further EU enlargement, first towards the countries of the Western Balkans, and later on also towards the countries of the Eastern Partnership, Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova. People of those countries deserve our solidarity, and we deserve a peaceful and stable neighbourhood on the European continent. Successes of Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova can be a very effective example to ordinary Russian people and the most effective assistance instruments for positive transformations in Russia. And I am absolutely sure that the EU, under your leadership, Madam von der Leyen, can deliver such an ambitious agenda. Best success.
Grazie. Onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Nica. 1 minute.
Domnule președinte, doamna von der Leyen, vreau să vă spun.
Thank you very much, President. Ms. von der Leyen, I appreciated your progressive and pro-European approach in your speech this morning and in the letter that you sent to our group. And as the head of the Romanian delegation in the S&D, I'll vote for you, and I'll tell why. I'll do it because of the hope to fight discrimination against Central and Eastern Europe. You're going to fight to avoid applying two different measures. There's the Schengen area. There are citizens in Europe on the left and Romanians on the right who do not have the same rights. And I hope that you will be able to fight against these different standards being applied. So you need to avoid applying different standards when it comes to agriculture as well. You know that farmers in Eastern countries have a lot less than farmers in Western EU countries, and so I think we need to have more fairness in the EU, and I hope you'll be able to grant the funds needed for regions in energy transition phases and industrial transition phases. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of families and children and mothers who are going to be affected if those transition regions, when it comes to energy and industry, do not have the funding they need, and that's the case today. So I wish you all the success. Thank you.
Dear Ursula von der Leyen, dear colleagues, Europe needs a stronger and more united foreign, security and defence policy. Lack of a common foreign and security policy renders many other nice decisions meaningless. This is an area where also the European Commission needs to show dedication. And it is my hope that the European Commission will be led by a president who is experienced in the area of security and defence, and who has a good understanding of the shortcomings that need to be improved, also in cooperation with NATO. Ursula von der Leyen has contributed to strengthening European defence capabilities and also in the eastern part of the European Union. It is also important that she would become the first woman to hold the office of the President of the European Commission. I will support Mrs von der Leyen today because of her experience in security and defence, and because she has an understanding and a vision of what is needed to make Europe stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Metsola. 1 minute 30.
Thank you. The Berlin Wall has been down longer than it was ever up. If ever there was a representation of the enduring success of Europe, this is it. More than personalities, Europe is hope. More than bureaucracy, it is justice. Now, our EU project has inspired people across generations, continents and peoples, but we have to keep working. We are not flawless. Our social economy, our free and open approach to trade has raised people out of poverty, but it's still too hard for too many. We are still too far away. And I want my children's generation to see Europe as the answer as much as it was for my parents. And that is why we cannot be silent when our fundamental freedoms are under threat. We can never accept that journalists like Daphne Caruana Galizia are intimidated and killed 21 months ago today. We must protect the media. We should never let EU citizenship be sold as a commodity. We cannot allow the next generation to have more plastic than fish in their seas. If we cannot find a bold fix for our environment and for our climate now, we never will. Equally, we cannot allow issues like migration to become existential questions that are argued only on short-term lines. We need better border management while remaining fair with those who are in need, firm with those who are not, and strong with those who seek to exploit the vulnerable. Our Europe is built on the certainty of our values, on the rule of law and of our freedoms. Without them, there can be nothing else. And Dr von der Leyen, I welcome your assurances and know that you will find us as constructive partners in standing up for our European way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larouturou. 1 minute.
Madame von der Leyen.
Mrs. von der Leyen, you have set an ambitious target for Europe, namely to halve our CO2 emissions by 2030. You are absolutely right. This is a question of life and death. But if we want to win this climate struggle, the key factor will be money. Yes, we need a climate bank. Yes, we need an investment plan. But we actually need to go further than that. We need to have a real climate budget, 100 billion euros every year, 100 billion in order to fund a Marshall Plan for Africa, a real research programme, and to help families and SMEs in Europe through subsidies in order to help them achieve this transition. So how do we find the 100 billion without imposing taxes on ordinary citizens? I think we need to now start fighting against European tax dumping. When I was little, tax on income in Europe was 40%. On average. Today it's 20%, and dividends yet are exploding. It's 20% here, whereas in the United States of America, from Roosevelt to Trump, it's always on average been 38%, because actually Roosevelt created a federal tax at the time. So if we want to win this climate battle and employment battle, Madam, do you agree with me when I say that the next multi-annual financial framework should set aside a climate budget, 100 billion per year, that would be funded through European income tax in order to fight this issue on climate? Can we get that kind of amount? 5%. Do you think that's too much to save the climate? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woutmans. 1 minute. Thank you, President. Congratulations, Ms. von der Leyen. To be honest, I would say you've done an excellent job today. Many of us were very, very critical. And I was too at the start, but what I heard was a passionate woman with a vision for Europe, who wants to renew Europe, who wants to work with the Parliament, who wants to give us the right of initiative. And of course, Madam von der Leyen, yes, of course, it's important that you're a woman and you're mentioning gender equality, and you want that in a new commission, and you want to fight gender violence. And yes, we always have 3 men in suits, you know, we're used to that. But, Madam, have you convinced us with this genuine migration policy? European Defence Union, I would have been hearing the word European Army. Maybe that'll come later. And Mrs. von der Leyen, I hope that you'll be able to take good hold of the reins and that you will be able to get Europe through these obstacles and that you will be able to make us big and strong. I wish you all the best, and you can count on our vote. Thank you. Mr. Mourjan, 1 minute 30.
Thank you very much, Madam President-designate. Dear colleagues, much was said. I will focus on 3 things. Firstly, Mrs. von der Leyen, I would like to congratulate you for striking the right balance on climate change, on energy policy and on protecting the environment. We have to do more in this area. We have to improve our energy efficiency. We have to reduce CO2 emissions, and we have to do it in a responsible way by measuring the economic, the social, the environmental impact of the measures that we take, by standing by the side of the people and of the regions that are affected, and by strengthening the economy, by strengthening the competitiveness of our economy. You are proposing an ambitious and a realistic approach. I think it's the correct one and I support it. Secondly, you are proposing a convergence instrument for the euro area. This is needed, but my kind request to you would be to open this instrument also to countries which are not yet in the euro area but which are preparing to join, to allow countries that are preparing to join the euro area to contribute to this instrument, to benefit from it and to be part of the decision making. This would enable their accession to the euro area, it would strengthen the European economy and it would also improve unity throughout the European Union. And thirdly, as a Romanian member of the European Parliament, I would like to say one word, and this is Schengen. Bulgaria and Romania have been fulfilling the conditions for joining the Schengen area since 2011, and we, the European Parliament, have demanded this several times. I would kindly request you that you stand by the side of the Parliament and that together with us you use the tools that you have at your disposal to enable Bulgaria and Romania's accession to the Schengen area. This is the one topic that the citizens of Bulgaria and Romania are expecting most from the European Union. It will improve the security of the Schengen area. It will not dilute it. And to conclude, I would just like to say, dear colleagues, we are a diverse Parliament. We are different. We are not the same. But through what I saw today from the President-designate in her guidelines and in her speech, I think she took all of our positions into account. And this is why I say she deserves the support of the Parliament today. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Onorevole Zorrinho.
Thank you, Mr. Zorrinho. Carlos, 1 minute.
Signora von der Leyen.
Madam von der Leyen, the European Parliament directly represents citizens. As a Portuguese socialist, I represent voters who want a progressive agenda for the EU's future. When you participated in an exchange of views with the S&D group, I had major misgivings as to whether your degree of commitment was compatible with what my colleagues in the Portuguese delegation and I have promised our voters. But your written responses to those questions, which the group asked, and your statement today have been more convincing. For this reason, we're in a position to move on to the next stage. Let's get down to specifics. On the specifics, I have 3 questions. What support can we expect from you in defending an ambitious MFF which is pro-convergence, pro-cohesion, and gives answers for the integrated development of our territories? What incentives will you provide for reforming the euro area and creating a robust EU budget which will protect the EU against future systemic crises? How will you turn the positive commitments you've entered into specific policies which will re-engage citizens with the European project, the marvellous European project? Ms von der Leyen, it's time for action.
Grazie. Onorevole in 't Veld.
Thank you. Ms. in 't Veld. Sophia, 1 minute.
Dear Mrs von der Leyen, I am fully convinced of your qualities. I'm over here, in the middle. In the middle. I'm the red dot in the middle, yes. So, I'm fully convinced of your qualities, but the question is, are you not just the right person, but the right person for this job? And there I am not yet fully convinced. Firstly, your proposal for a rule of law mechanism, in my view, is insufficient, it is weak and too narrow in scope, and I also happen to know that it's actually a proposal of Mr. Timmermans that's supposed to be proposed this week, and I had a sneak peek at the leaked version of that. Secondly, I would like to hear you say something about how you are going to fight racism and xenophobia, which is a big problem in the European Union of today. And thirdly, I'm not so concerned about the right policies because I endorse the proposals that you've made, but the enforcement of those policies, because in the European Union we're very good at making rules, we're extremely bad at enforcing them. I'm talking about Dieselgate, data protection scandals of Facebook, money laundering, I mean, need I spell it out, rule of law and fundamental rights violations in Hungary and Poland and elsewhere. Now, previous commissions have been very timid, and for me the key question is, you are very much the candidate of the member states simply because of the procedure that was followed. Now, are you going to be, like previous commissions, the lapdog of those member states, or are you going to be the pit bull that I would like you to be? That's what I need to hear.
Grazie. Onorevole
Thank you, Ms. Stadler, please. 1 minute 30. Thank you, President. Dear Madam Designate Commissioner, colleagues, today this is a historic moment because it's going to lay the path for the next 5 years and lay the route. And the election showed us that the citizens are more interested in the EU now. However, they also expect us to come up with solutions. They expect guarantees for their prosperity and freedom and security. And they want a Europe that protects. And that is what the Austrian presidency used as its slogan. We're the strongest and we want to be able to shape the process. This nomination process can be criticised quite rightly, and that means that citizens have less confidence in it. But you need to separate the people who are being nominated from that process. And now it's about the trust of the citizens and getting that back again very quickly. We need to look to the future. We need a European Union that can work. There are deficits that need to be overcome. And I'd like to take you at your word. You were talking about the Spitzen candidate process, and you want to anchor that in the future because citizens need to be kept on board. We need to show them that the decisions taken at European level here can be done transparently. We need missions for Europe. We need personalities, people who are ready to take up those responsibilities, who are prepared to be proactive and to implement all of this. And with you, we have someone at the head of the Commission who is able to implement things. And that's what you were convincing us of today. And I think you've convinced many colleagues today. And so that's why you have our full support. And I can say that I think you are going to identify the right topics. They will be the right ones at the heart of the debate and ones that have not been looked at before. For example, gender violence against women. And these are issues that we're going to support you fully on in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shida, 1 minute. Please stick to the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President. Mrs. von der Leyen, I was very critical about your nomination, but I have to acknowledge that today you held a very good speech before the House with a lot of good content, important content. But let's be honest, hand on heart. Europe has heard a lot of good speeches, and what we're actually interested in is specific projects. For instance, tax fairness, tax justice in Europe, avoiding tax evasion, whether it's legal or illegal, that we put a stop to it. We also need to have genuine measures in order to protect the climate. We also need to make sure that these social aspects become reality in Europe, are implemented, and that is precisely the stumbling block. Implementation in Europe. It often fails. It fails very often because of the member states, and many of them are, under conservative governments as member states, and they are, of course, part of the family of the European People's Party as political groups. So this particular decision, is it the right one for Europe? Last but not least, of course, when it comes to the rule of law and fundamental rights, on that point, it's particularly important for me not just to pay lip service to this, but really to guarantee, and that you will guarantee, were you to be elected President of the Commission, that you make sure that Orban, Salvini, that Europe will not yield to them in future either. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goerens, 1 minute. Thank you, President. Ms. von der Leyen, look at the challenges ahead of us. I despair when I look at the potential that the EU has. It brings some consolation. Since Barack Obama left office, the free world is rudderless. Multilateralism is in crisis. Someone needs to step in. Who will it be? Europe is the answer. We need to ensure that we all put our shoulders to the wheel in Europe to overcome the north-south and east-west divides. There are existential planetary threats, climate being top of the list. And this means we need China, India, the Middle East to work together, because otherwise decarbonising the planet's economy will be impossible. So we need to have the courage to go forward. If you're elected, and if you're successful, and I hope you will be, then you'll get no thanks during your term of office. If, however, unfortunately, you fail, and I very much hope you won't, then you and we all will be cursed. And that's the responsibility we have ahead of us. Thank you, Ms. Maydell, 1 minute 30.
Designate. We need to make sure that Europe reaches to each and every European. Europe is not simply and just Brussels or Strasbourg. Europe is each and every one of us. Europe
must not be more for some and less for others. We need to make sure that Europe reaches to every village, town, boy, girl, student, professional, every citizen through a well thought MFF and initiatives. No European should leave their region due to an economic reason. Rules should apply to all. When countries such as Bulgaria fulfil the Schengen criteria, they should indeed be part of it. So will you engage with member states in the Council that find it difficult to recognise that this criteria is fulfilled? On Eurozone, in order not to be seen as a club for some, if countries fulfil the criteria, do you foresee the enlargement of the Eurozone in the next 5 years? And also, every business, every entrepreneur, every SME has problems employing the prepared and skilled professionals. Shouldn't we be a little bit more ambitious and have decisive actions in upskilling our people? After today, it will be very important that we implement the talk, and I'm ready to walk alongside you in delivering for a stable energy market, forward-looking and modernising industry, one that embraces technology and innovation in order to make sure that our continent is even more competitive. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schaldemose, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you for your address, Mrs. von der Leyen, and thank you also for listening to our demands from the Socialists and Democrats group. Climate policy, CO2 reductions 50% by 2030, that's good. Now, if we want to attain this particular target, then we of course need to make sure that we as member states act. In the Nordic countries, we have 3 Socialist and Democrat governments. We are prepared to forge ahead. In Denmark, we now have a new government, and we're talking about, in fact, the same reduction, well, in fact, 70% reduction by 2030. So we are forging ahead. I very much hope that we'll have an opportunity to act on all of this. We need to make sure that we ban diesel cars, diesel vehicles. That would be one important step. We need to take these measures. We need to be effective. We need to be ambitious in terms of our policies. And the European Union started off as a coal and steel community. I very much hope, Mrs. von der Leyen, that you will be there in order to head a European Union where we become a climate union. And if you've achieved that, then you will have my support, madam. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Ms. Gammon, 1 minute.
Mrs. von der Leyen, I really hope that you will succeed. I'm not convinced today, but I wish to be convinced by the end of your mandate. If we want to tackle climate change, if we want to define the digital age by European standards, we need to stop disappointing people by always just enforcing the lowest common denominator. We need to surprise them with our ambition, and we need to surprise them by supporting the biggest common goal, the biggest common vision that we all have. And I agree with many of the points that you raised today, but we all know that the main hurdle to tackle them does not lie here, and also not in the Commission, but most likely in the Council. And the Council does seem to be the one institution that comes out of this entire ordeal strengthened. And I do worry about that. I do worry that we are not willing to talk about the topics and to go there to really reform the European Union and to go where it hurts. Because I do think that we need to change this. And this was the vote that the people made in May to really reform and renew the European Union so that it works better. And I do think that it needs to work better for its citizens. And we need to reform and renew the European Union, because otherwise all the important visions that you laid out today will not manifest, and I do not think that we have the time for that. Thank you.
Grazie. Mr. Corbett, 1 minute.
Thank you. Let me say that the comments about democracy made from the now empty benches at the back over there lead me to point out that you, Mrs. von der Leyen, will only take office if approved by a majority in this Parliament, whereas next week in Britain, a new Prime Minister will take office without the need for any affirmative vote in Parliament. A shocking contrast. But will you get a majority? You are asking this Parliament, after all, to back down from one of its principles, the Spitzenkandidat, to which it was strongly attached. So you have had to make serious concessions, movements to what we in this Parliament demand. And you have made a number. What you said on policy is significant. What you said on a right of legislative initiative is important. And may I add that what you said on Brexit is important, that you accept the need for a deadline extension for good reasons. Well, let me tell you, there is a good reason. And that reason is that the British public is changing its mind on Brexit. A majority of people elected to this Parliament recently are against Brexit. Opinion polls are moving. Every opposition party in the House of Commons now, every single one of them wants a new referendum. Keep that door open. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Our final speaker, Mr. Marques. Pedro, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mrs. von der Leyen, your commitment, oral and written, to more competitiveness, to a sustainable and solidary Europe shows that you saw correctly through our programme, but you also saw through the expectations of the European. Europe is in need of urgent action. So it was good to see that you didn't hesitate in assuming commitments that go towards what citizens expect, which is clear commitment, clear achievements. We now expect due capacity to compromise and to overcome the blockages from the Council on several issues. On decarbonisation, on migration, on Eurozone reform, on the pillar of social rights, there's no room for hesitation. Huge challenges lie immediately on our hands, such as the approval of an adequate budget for Europe. We take your words today and your written words with great expectation. The European Parliament will deliver on its part. The citizens of the EU expect nothing less from us. That means that your pledge on this day is a solemn one. Europeans demand nothing less than 5 years of redemption of the European project after 10 years of crisis and hesitation. Let us rebuild from now on the Europe of our dreams. Thank you.
Grazie. Era l'ultimo.
Thank you. So that was our final speaker, and we shall now give Ms von der Leyen the chance to respond. You have the floor, madam.
Mr. President, honourable members, thank you very much for this lively discussion. And it was constructive, it was controversial, and if there's any proof needed that democracy in Europe is alive and kicking, you brought that proof in this Parliament today, and I thank you for that. Indeed, it has been mentioned many, many times that we had only 2 weeks to get to know each other. I'm here. It is a great honour for me to have had the opportunity to present the programme. Of course, we know that a speech is just a speech, it's limited, but I think you have had today in your offices the guidelines that I laid out to all of us, so written down are details on the topics: a climate neutral Europe in 2050, a more social and competitive Europe, a Europe that makes use of its full potential, a Europe that has a new push on European democracy, and a strong Europe that protects our European way of life. I am aware, when I listen to you and many, many arguments, that there is a feeling of a division between Central East Europe and West Europe. We have to overcome that division. I'm full of respect when I think of the effort the Central European and the Eastern European countries undertook and undertake to join the European Union, to join Schengen, to join the Eurozone. And I think when they meet the criteria, this has to be rewarded. And I'm aware of the fact there is still a certain division between South and North. I think I've extensively elaborated about how we could overcome that, how we find the right balance between responsibility and flexibility, investment and growth that is needed, and where we will work together. I want to involve and get in touch closer with this European Parliament. And that's why I support the right of initiative. That's why I believe we need to find sound ways to anchor the Spitzenkandidat system. I'm convinced we're able to do that. I want to build new trust. I want to build partnership between the European Commission and the European Parliament. I am your natural ally, if I may put it that way. And at the very end, before we're going to go in the vote tonight, let me end perhaps with a saying that comes once again from a Greek statesman. He was one of the founders of democracy, and I think it's a wonderful motto for our common work. It says, "The secret to happiness is freedom. The secret to freedom is courage." Let's have courage together. Let's be courageous on the European Union. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Ms von der Leyen. The session stands adjourned. The vote is planned for 6 p.m. today, and we now adjourn until 3 p.m. Thank you very much.